I arrived at Jack's family reunion with our adopted daughter Grace clinging to my hand. The sprawling Tennessee estate buzzed with relatives I barely knew. Grace looked up at me, her 7-year-old eyes wide with excitement about meeting her new family. I smiled reassuringly, smoothing her carefully chosen dress. Neither of us realized that within hours, a single cruel comment would shatter our hearts and transform the entire Davis family forever. The Davis family reunion had been marked on our calendar for months. After 5 years of heartbreaking infertility treatments and 2 miscarriages, Jack and I had adopted Grace 2 years ago. She was our miracle, our everything. The journey to parenthood had been difficult, but the moment we held Grace, we knew our family was complete. Rosemarie, Jack, you made it. Diane, Jack's mother, approached us with open arms. Her smile seemed warm, but I noticed how her eyes lingered on Grace for just a beat too long before looking away. And this must be Grace. Jack beamed, oblivious to his mother's hesitation. Mom, this is our daughter. Well, isn't she cute? Diane responded, patting Grace's head like she was a puppy. The other children are playing by the oak tree. Why don't you run along, dear? Grace looked up at me, uncertain. I nodded encouragingly, and she cautiously headed toward the group of children. Jack! A booming voice called from across the lawn. Troy, Jack's older brother, waved him over. Grandpa Walter wants to talk business. Sorry, honey, Jack whispered, kissing my cheek. Family stuff. I'll be quick. I watched as Jack jogged over to where his grandfather Walter sat regally in an ornate chair on the patio. At 87, Walter Davis still commanded respect as the family patriarch and controller of the considerable Davis fortune. Troy and his very pregnant wife Amanda hovered nearby, clearly eager to make a good impression. Left alone, I surveyed the crowd of unfamiliar faces. The Davis family was large and scattered across several states, gathering only for these annual reunions at Walter's estate. I felt the subtle stares as I moved through the crowd, the whispered conversations that halted when I approached. Amanda cornered me by the drinks table, one hand resting on her prominent baby bump. This is number 3 for us, she announced proudly. Troy's mother is thrilled to have another true Davis joining the family. Blood really does matter, don't you think? I forced a smile, gripping my glass tighter. Family is about love, not blood. She tilted her head sympathetically. Of course you'd say that. It must be hard knowing Grace will never really look like either of you. Before I could respond, she was called away by her 2 children, both perfect miniatures of Troy with the distinctive Davis blue eyes. I glanced toward Grace, who was standing at the edge of the children's group, clearly struggling to join in. My heart ached, watching her tentative attempts to belong. They can be a bit cliquish, a voice said beside me. A woman about my age with kind eyes extended her hand. I'm Stephanie, Jack's cousin from the California branch. You must be Rosemarie. Nice to meet you, I replied, grateful for the friendly face. And that's your little one? She nodded toward Grace. She's beautiful. Thank you, I said, emotion unexpectedly tightening my throat. I noticed Diane's reaction, Stephanie said quietly. Don't take it personally. She's traditional. Traditional? The Davis bloodline is everything to her. But not everyone in this family shares those views. Stephanie squeezed my arm. Grace is your daughter. Don't let anyone make you feel differently. I watched Jack across the lawn, deep in conversation with Troy and Walter, completely oblivious to the undercurrents surrounding his wife and daughter. I'd hoped today would be different. Jack had promised his family would embrace Grace fully, given time. But 2 years later, we were still waiting. Suddenly, I saw Diane approach a group of distant relatives. She pointed discreetly toward Grace, and clearly mouthed the words the adopted one before continuing her conversation. My stomach dropped as I realized this wasn't going to be the day Grace was truly welcomed into the Davis family. As the afternoon wore on, Jack remained entangled in family business discussions. I kept a watchful eye on Grace while navigating the subtle dismissals and thoughtless comments from various family members. Does she know about her real parents? One elderly aunt asked loudly. I hear those foreign adoptions can be problematic when they get older. another whispered, not quite under her breath. Just as I was considering gathering grace and finding a quiet spot away from the crowd, Diane clinked her glass for attention. Everyone, the photographer will be setting up for the annual Davis family portrait in 1 hour. This year's theme is Generations of Davis Blood, so please be ready on time. Stephanie appeared at my side again. Rosemarie, she said quietly, you should know Diane's been talking about who belongs in the portrait. I think you should prepare yourself. The afternoon stretched on with organized family activities that somehow always seemed to exclude Grace. During the 3-legged race, there were coincidentally no partners left for her. When family stories were shared, references to Davis' eyes and Davis' stubbornness were emphasized, with pointed glances toward Grace, who possessed neither. I thought back to the first time we'd brought Grace to meet Jack's family. She was 5 then, still adjusting to her new life with us. Diane had prepared a special family dinner, but had forgotten to set a place for Grace at the main table. When I pointed it out, she laughed it off as an oversight, and squeezed in a small folding chair in the corner, away from everyone else. Jack hadn't noticed my tears, as I helped our daughter eat her dinner in isolation. Now, watching Grace try repeatedly to join her cousins in their games, only to be subtly excluded, those familiar feelings of helplessness and anger returned. Lily and Blake, Troy and Amanda's children, clearly mirrored their parents' behavior, turning away whenever Grace approached. Family history time, Diane called out, gathering everyone on the wide porch. Children in front, please. Grace rushed forward eagerly, finding a spot on the steps. I saw Diane frown slightly, but say nothing as she opened the massive Davis family album. This is your great-great-grandfather Davis, who started our legacy, she began, showing sepia, toned photos. See how you have his chin, Blake? And Lily, you have the same eyes as your great-grandmother Elizabeth. For 45 minutes, Diane traced features and personalities through generations, never once acknowledging Grace, who sat attentively throughout. When Grace finally raised her hand and innocently asked, "Do I look like anyone?" an uncomfortable silence fell. Diane closed the book with a snap. Well, how could you? You're not actually related to anyone here, dear. Jack was nowhere to be found during this exchange, having been pulled into yet another conversation with Walter about the family business. I silently fumed at his absence, at how he always seemed to miss these critical moments of exclusion. Later, I overheard Diane speaking to her sister near the refreshment table. Jack assures me they're still trying for their own. This adoption thing was really just to make Rosemarie feel better after the miscarriages. Once they have a real Davis child, things will normalize. My hands shook so badly, I nearly dropped my glass. Jack and I had never discussed having biological children after adopting Grace. We had agreed she was our daughter, period. Was he saying something different to his family? I searched the grounds for Jack, but instead found Stephanie, who had been watching Grace play at a distance from the other children. How long has this been going on? I asked, nodding toward the deliberate exclusion. Stephanie sighed. Always, I'm afraid. Diane is obsessed with bloodlines and legacy. She views adoption as temporary. And Walter? I asked, noticing the patriarch watching us from his chair. Walter is complicated. He controls the family money, so everyone jumps to please him. But he's not necessarily on the same page as Diane. I've heard him challenge her before on family matters. I glanced toward the elderly man, surprised when he met my gaze directly, his expression unreadable. The family portrait is Diane's pet project, Stephanie continued. She's been talking all morning about how important it is to capture the true Davis legacy for Walter's 90th birthday next year. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. What exactly has she been saying? Stephanie hesitated. Just be prepared. She's been very specific about who should be in the generational shot. Before I could press further, the photographer began setting up elaborate lighting equipment on the lawn. Diane bustled about, directing family members into position. I saw Jack helping Walter from his chair, still deep in conversation about business prospects. "Jack," I called, trying to get his attention. He waved distractedly, but remained with his grandfather. "Places, everyone," Diane called out. "This is for the legacy wall, so we need to get it just right." Grace ran up to me, excitement lighting her face. "Mom, is it time for the picture? I've never been in a big family photo before." Her innocence broke my heart. "Yes, sweetheart. Let's fix your hair first." I knelt to smooth her dark curls, buying time as I searched desperately for Jack. As family members arranged themselves by Diane's direction, I noticed how methodically she was organizing everyone by branches of the Davis family tree. My unease grew with each passing moment. "Children in the front row, please," the photographer called, adjusting his camera on the tripod. Grace, wearing the special blue dress we'd chosen especially for today, stepped forward eagerly. Her small patent leather shoes gleamed in the afternoon sun as she carefully positioned herself between Lily and Blake. My heart swelled seeing her there, finally included. "No, no, no," Diane's voice cut through the chatter. She strode forward, her expression tight. "Grace, dear, this is just for family members. Why don't you wait over there?" She pointed to a bench several yards away. Grace stood frozen, confusion clouding her face. "But I am family," she said in a small voice. Diane's smile didn't reach her eyes. "No, sweetie. This portrait is for real Davis family only, blood family." The entire gathering fell silent. Several adults shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. The photographer busied himself with his equipment, clearly wanting no part of the uncomfortable scene unfolding. "But Daddy said I'm a Davis now," Grace insisted, her lower lip beginning to tremble. "He said when you adopt someone, they're really truly your family forever." Diane's expression hardened slightly. "That's a nice thought, dear, but this is about the Davis bloodline. For the family historical record." She turned to the group. "Now, let's continue." I stood paralyzed with shock, searching desperately for Jack, who was still helping Walter with his medication on the far side of the lawn, completely unaware of what was happening. Diane." Stephanie stepped forward hesitantly. "I don't think—" "This isn't your concern, Stephanie," Diane cut her off coldly. "The portrait arrangement has already been decided." I watched as tears filled Grace's eyes. Her small shoulders slumped as she stepped back from the group. Lily whispered something to Blake, and both children giggled behind their hands. Grace turned and walked slowly to the bench, each step like a dagger in my heart. "That's better," Diane said briskly. "Now everyone smile." The photographer looked uncertainly between Grace and the group, then shrugged apologetically in my direction before turning to his work. "Big smiles, everyone. 3, 2, 1. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't process the casual cruelty I had just witnessed. My daughter sat alone on a bench, silent tears streaming down her face, while her father's family posed happily without her. Without us. Because I remained rooted in place, unable to join the real family photo, unwilling to abandon Grace. After what seemed like an eternity, Jack returned to my side. "What's wrong? Where's Grace?" I pointed wordlessly to our daughter sitting alone. "Your mother told her she couldn't be in the family portrait because she's not real family. She's not blood." Jack's face paled. "What? When did this happen?" "Just now, while you were with Walter." "No one said anything, Jack. They just let it happen." He ran a hand through his hair. "I'm sure Mom didn't mean it like that. She's just traditional about family history, and—" "Don't," I cut him off. "Don't you dare defend this. Look at our daughter." Grace sat perfectly still, tears silently tracking down her cheeks, watching as the Davis family smiled for generation portraits, cousins' portraits, and siblings' portraits. Each configuration a fresh reminder of her exclusion. Jack approached her, kneeling in front of the bench. I couldn't hear what he said, but her little head remained bowed, her tears continuing to fall. He picked her up and carried her inside the house, away from curious eyes. I remained where I was, watching as Diane efficiently directed the final group shots. Not a single family member questioning Grace's absence or my own. Only Stephanie caught my eye, her expression conveying silent apology and shared outrage. As the portrait session finally ended, I noticed Walter watching me from his chair. The family patriarch's piercing blue eyes, the famous Davis eyes that Grace didn't share, seemed to see right through me. For a moment, I thought he might say something, but he simply nodded slightly before being wheeled away by a caregiver. Inside, I found Jack and Grace in a quiet corner of the library. Grace was curled in her father's lap, still crying silently, as he awkwardly patted her back. "It's okay, sweetie," he was saying. "Grandma didn't mean it. She just gets confused about these things." "But she said I'm not real family," Grace whispered. "Am I not really your daughter?" My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Of course you're our daughter," I said firmly, joining them on the couch. "Forever and always. Some people just don't understand what makes a real family." "Then why did Grandma say those things?" Grace asked, her eyes swollen from crying. "And why did everyone let her?" Jack shifted uncomfortably. "Grandma is traditional. She doesn't mean to hurt feelings." I shot him a warning look. "What Grandma did was wrong, Grace. Being family isn't about having the same blood or looking alike. It's about love and choosing each other every day." "But nobody said anything," Grace insisted. Even the other kids laughed. "Lily said I don't count because I'm not a real Davis." I pulled Grace into my arms, her small body still shaking with silent sobs. "Those children were wrong too, and the adults should have stood up for you." Jack stood up, running a hand through his hair. "Look, let's not make this bigger than it is. Mom is set in her ways, but she'll come around. Making a scene will only make things worse." "Making a scene?" I hissed. "Your mother publicly humiliated our daughter, and you're worried about making a scene?" Jack had the decency to look ashamed. "That's not what I meant. I just think, dinner is served." Diane's voice echoed through the house, cutting off further discussion. "We'll talk later," Jack whispered. "Let's just get through dinner without any drama. Please, Rosemary. For Grace's sake." For Grace's sake. Those words stuck in my throat as we made our way to the formal dining room. Grace walked between us, her hand cold and limp in mine. Her usual skipping step was gone, replaced by a hesitant shuffle. The damage was already done, and my husband wanted to pretend everything was fine. The massive oak dining table gleamed under chandelier light, name cards marking each place. I wasn't surprised to find Grace seated at the far end, between two elderly great-aunts she'd never met, while Jack and I were separated at opposite ends of the table. "Mom," Jack began, noticing the arrangement. "Could we—" "Everyone take your assigned seats, please," Diane interrupted smoothly. "We've arranged the table by family branches for easier conversation." I locked eyes with Jack, silently pleading with him to challenge this, but he merely sighed and moved toward his designated chair. Gritting my teeth, I guided Grace to her isolated spot, pulling up a chair beside her despite the disruption to Diane's careful planning. "Rosemary, you're actually seated by Troy," Diane pointed out with forced pleasantness. "I'm sitting with my daughter," I replied evenly, meeting her gaze. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table, until Walter cleared his throat from the head position. "Let the girl sit where she wants, Diane. The seating chart isn't sacred." Diane's lips thinned to a tight line, but she nodded stiffly and signaled for dinner to be served. Throughout the elaborate meal, Grace barely touched her food. She sat silently, occasionally wiping tears that continued to fall despite Jack's attempts to catch her eye and make funny faces from across the table. His efforts to normalize the situation only highlighted how badly he was mishandling it. I thought back to my own childhood, when my father remarried and his new wife's family had treated me as an unwelcome outsider at gatherings. The pain of exclusion never fully healed, and now history was repeating itself with my daughter. Halfway through the main course, Diane stood and tapped her glass. "I'd like to propose a toast to the Davis family legacy. For over 100 years, our bloodline has produced exceptional individuals. Today, I look around and see the same Davis features, the same Davis spirit in our newest generations. To family, the real meaning of legacy." Glasses raised around the table as I sat in stunned disbelief at the deliberate cruelty. Grace's small shoulders began to shake beside me. "May I be excused?" she whispered. I nodded, watching as she slipped away from the table unnoticed by everyone except Walter, whose sharp eyes followed her exit with an unreadable expression. "She's just tired," I explained quietly to the great-aunts, who hadn't even acknowledged Grace's presence throughout dinner. Jack caught my eye from across the table, his expression pleading for patience. I looked away, unable to mask my disappointment in his passivity. As dessert was served, Stephanie slid into Grace's empty chair beside me. "I wanted to check if you're okay. That portrait business was completely unacceptable." "Thank you," I said, my voice tight. "At least someone in this family has the decency to acknowledge it." "Diane's always been controlling, but this is a new low," she murmured. "You should know she's done this before. My cousin Parker's wife wasn't allowed in last year's portrait because they were only engaged, not married yet. Diane has very specific ideas about who counts as family." I noticed Walter watching our conversation intently from his place at the head of the table. Throughout dinner, he'd been observing Diane with what appeared to be disapproval, though he'd said nothing beyond allowing me to sit with Grace. "Does Walter share Diane's views?" I asked quietly. Stephanie followed my gaze. "Walter is complex. He's traditional in many ways, but he's also suffered his own exclusions. His second wife was treated terribly by some family members, so he understands what it's like to have someone you love rejected." "He hasn't exactly spoken up," I pointed out. "No, but don't mistake his silence for agreement. Walter calculates every move. If he's watching this closely, he has his reasons." After an interminable dinner, I excused myself to check on Grace. I found her curled up on our bed in the guest room, still in her blue dress, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Though her eyes were closed, the wet tracks on her cheeks told me she'd cried herself to sleep. Gently, I removed her shoes and covered her with a blanket. "I'm so sorry, my love," I whispered, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "This isn't what family is supposed to be." I stayed with her until Jack finally appeared in the doorway, his expression troubled. "She's still upset," he said unnecessarily. "Of course she is," I replied coldly. "Your mother told her she isn't really your daughter, and you did nothing." Jack closed the door quietly behind him. "That's not fair, Rosemarie. I wasn't even there when it happened." "And afterward? When you found out? You told her Grandma didn't mean it, and that we shouldn't make waves. What did you want me to do? 'Cause a scene in front of everyone? That wouldn't have helped Grace." I stood up, careful not to disturb our sleeping daughter. Standing up for her would have helped. Telling your mother she was wrong would have helped. Showing Grace that she matters more than your mother's approval would have helped. Jack sank onto the edge of the bed. "It's complicated. You don't understand the dynamics in my family." "I understand perfectly. Your mother doesn't consider our daughter family, and you're too afraid to contradict her." "That's not true. I love Grace. You know I do." "Do I?" "Because today I watched you choose your mother's comfort over our daughter's heartbreak." Jack's face flushed. "That's not what happened. I'm trying to navigate this carefully. Mom is set in her ways, but she'll come around if we're patient." "Patient? Grace is 7 years old. How many more years of rejection should she endure while waiting for your mother to come around?" "You're being melodramatic. It was just a picture." "It wasn't just a picture. It was a public declaration that our daughter isn't really family, that she doesn't belong." Jack ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Look, adoption is still new for some people in my family. They need time to adjust." 2 years isn't new, Jack. And basic decency doesn't require adjustment time. My family is traditional. Stop saying that. Traditional doesn't mean cruel. Grace stirred in her sleep, and we both lowered our voices. "I need some air," Jack muttered, moving toward the door. "We can talk more when we're both calmer." After he left, I sat beside Grace, watching her troubled sleep. Even unconscious, her brow remained furrowed, her breathing occasionally catching on a sob. The damage done today wouldn't be erased with Jack's platitudes or time. Unable to remain still with my thoughts, I stepped into the hallway, intending to find a quiet place to collect myself. Instead, I froze as I heard Diane's voice floating up from the sitting room below. "It's really for the best, Amanda. Jack deserves real children, his own children." "Has he said anything about trying again?" Amanda's voice replied. "He assures me they're still trying. The adoption was just temporary to please Rosemarie after the miscarriages. Once they have their own child, things will normalize." Poor Jack. He always wanted to carry on the Davis name properly. "Exactly. I'm not being cruel. I'm being realistic. That child will never truly be a Davis, and pretending otherwise does her no favors. I gripped the banister so hard my knuckles turned white. Jack had told his mother we were still trying? That Grace was temporary? The betrayal cut deeper than anything Diane could have done. I turned to find Stephanie standing behind me, her expression confirming she'd heard everything too. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, gently pulling me away from the stairs. "You shouldn't have heard that. Did you know? About Jack telling them Grace was temporary?" She shook her head firmly. "No. And honestly, I don't believe it. Jack adores Grace, anyone can see that. I think Diane is hearing what she wants to hear. Then why wouldn't Jack correct her? Why let her believe something so hurtful? Because confronting Diane means risking his relationship with her. Jack's always been the peacekeeper in the family, even at his own expense, and now at Grace's. I needed to find Jack. We needed to have a serious conversation about his family and our future. But as I turned to look for him, I nearly collided with Walter, who had silently approached in his wheelchair. "Mrs. Davis," he said formally. "A word in my study, if you please." It wasn't a request. Stephanie squeezed my arm encouragingly before slipping away, leaving me to follow the family patriarch down the hall. Walter's study was a time capsule of Davis family history. Photos covered every wall, leather, bound albums filled the bookshelves, and a massive family tree was framed behind his desk. "Sit," Walter instructed, wheeling himself behind the desk. "I observed what happened today. All of it." I perched on the edge of a leather chair, unsure what to expect. "Diane was out of line," he stated bluntly, surprising me. "The child belongs in the family portrait." "Thank you," I said cautiously. "I appreciate you saying that." "Don't thank me yet. I allowed it to happen." "Why?" "To see who would stand up to her. Not many did. Certainly not my grandson." Walter's piercing blue eyes held mine. "Jack has always been weak when it comes to his mother." "He's not weak," I defended automatically, then paused. "He's just conflict, averse. A polite term for weakness when it comes at the expense of one's child." Walter opened a drawer and removed an old photograph. "Do you know who this is?" The sepia image showed a stern-looking woman standing beside a young girl, perhaps 10 years old. "No. This is Diane at age 10, with her stepmother, Eleanor. Diane's birth mother died when she was 3. Eleanor raised her as her own for 15 years. I stared at the photo in shock. Diane was raised by a stepmother? But she's so opposed to non-biological family connections. Precisely the irony. After Eleanor died, Diane systematically removed all traces of her from our family history. If you look at the albums Diane curates, Eleanor doesn't exist. Walter tapped the photo. She's rewritten her own history to match her preferred narrative. Does Jack know this? Perhaps not the full extent. Diane has spent decades constructing the illusion of the pure Davis bloodline. Few challenge her because she controls the family social connections, even if I control the finances. Walter's expression hardened. "But I've had enough. Your daughter deserves better. What do you suggest I do?" "That depends. Are you willing to fight for your daughter, even if it means potentially damaging your relationship with the Davis family? With Jack?" Without hesitation, I answered truthfully. Walter's severe expression softened slightly. "Good answer. Then I believe it's time Diane faced some uncomfortable truths, not just about your daughter but about our family history." As Walter outlined what he knew, and what he suspected, pieces began falling into place. Diane's obsession with bloodlines, her systematic erasure of adoptions and second marriages from family records, her control over family gatherings and who was considered real family. "I can provide you access to the historical records and photos she's hidden away," Walter offered, "including evidence that the Davis family has a long history of adoptions and blended families that Diane has conveniently erased." "Thank you," I said sincerely. "But why help me? Why now?" Walter's gaze drifted to the window. "I'm 80, 7 years old, Mrs. Davis. I've watched Diane twist our family history for decades, hurting people I cared about in the process. My second wife, the love of my life, was treated abominably by her. I regret not taking a stronger stand then. He turned back to me, his expression resolved. I will not make the same mistake with your daughter. As I left Walter's study, I literally bumped into Jack in the hallway. There you are, he said. I've been looking everywhere. Grace is awake and asking for you. We need to talk, I said firmly. Now. In our guest room, Grace had curled herself into the window seat, staring out at the darkness. She didn't turn when we entered. Grace, sweetheart, Dad and I need to talk privately. Will you be okay for a few minutes? She nodded without looking at us. My heart ached at her uncharacteristic quietness. In the adjacent sitting room, I closed the door and faced Jack. Did you tell your mother that Grace was temporary? That we were still trying for our own children? Jack's face paled. What? No, I would never say that. Your mother seems to think otherwise. I overheard her telling Amanda that you assured her our adoption was just to please me after the miscarriages. That's not true, Jack insisted. I've never said anything like that. But you've never corrected her either, have you? When she makes those comments, you stay silent. Jack's silence now was answer enough. Has she been making comments like this all along? Even before today? He sighed, sinking onto the ottoman. She's made suggestions. Comments about Grace's background, about us trying again for biological children. I just ignored them. I thought she'd eventually accept things. And you never told me? Never stood up for our daughter? I didn't want to upset you. What good would it do to tell you every thoughtless comment my mother makes? It would have prepared us for today. It would have shown Grace that you're on her side, not your mother's. I am on her side. I love Grace more than anything. Love isn't just a feeling, Jack. It's what you do. And today, what you did was let your mother publicly reject our daughter while you stood by silently. Jack buried his face in his hands. I messed up. I know I did. But what do we do now? Pack up and leave? Never see my family again? No, I said, my mind racing with everything I'd learned from Walter and Stephanie. We're not running away. That would only reinforce to Grace that she doesn't belong here. Then what? We fight back, not with anger or accusations, but with truth. I squared my shoulders, decision made. And you need to decide right now, Jack. Are you with me, or with your mother? Jack looked up, his expression pained but resolute. With you. Always with you and Grace. Just tell me what to do. While the Davis family slept, Stephanie, Jack, and I worked through the night in Walter's study, preparing what Walter called a history lesson, long overdue. Are you sure this is the right approach? Jack asked nervously, as we sorted through the materials Walter had provided. It feels calculated. It is calculated, I confirmed, reviewing the video editing software Stephanie had set up on her laptop. Your mother has been calculating for years, carefully constructing a false narrative about this family. We're just introducing facts. Stephanie nodded in agreement. Sometimes the most powerful response to manipulation isn't anger but truth. Walter had provided us with a treasure trove of family history. Diane had systematically excluded from her carefully curated narrative photos of adoptions dating back 3 generations, documentation of second and third marriages, even evidence of a Davis ancestor who had adopted 6 orphans after the Civil War. Most damning were the photos of Diane herself, with her beloved stepmother Eleanor, the woman who had raised her from age 3, but whom Diane now refused to acknowledge. I had no idea, Jack kept saying as we worked. How could she erase so much family history? People construct narratives that support their worldview, Stephanie explained. For Diane, the pure bloodline story gives her control and status. The actual messy, beautiful reality of family threatens that. While Jack and Stephanie assembled the historical evidence, I worked on the emotional core of our presentation. Earlier in the evening, before dinner, I had conducted casual interviews with various family members, asking them to define family for a getting to know you video. Their responses, filmed on my phone, were powerful. Family is who shows up when everyone else leaves, Troy's teenage son had said. Family means having people who love you exactly as you are, an elderly great aunt offered. Family is about choice, not chance, Stephanie had answered thoughtfully. The people who choose each other every day. Even Amanda, for all her bloodline talk, had given a thoughtful response. Family means creating a legacy of love that outlasts you. The most heartbreaking footage came from Grace herself. After she had fallen asleep again, I had gently placed my phone to record her tearful explanation to her stuffed rabbit about why she couldn't be in the picture. "They said I'm not real family, Hoppy," she had whispered. "But Daddy promised when they adopted me that I was really truly his forever." Did he make a mistake? When Jack watched that clip, he broke down completely. "I had no idea how much damage was being done," he said through tears. "I thought I was keeping the peace, but I was betraying our daughter." "It's not too late to make it right," I assured him, squeezing his hand. Walter's contribution proved most shocking of all, a series of home movies showing Diane as a child, clearly adoring her stepmother Eleanor. In one poignant clip, young Diane presented Eleanor with a handmade card reading, "To the best mother in the world." "The hypocrisy is staggering," Jack whispered, watching his mother's childhood expressions of love toward the woman she now denied. By dawn, we had assembled a powerful presentation that told the true story of the Davis family, not the sanitized version Diane preferred, but the real, messy, beautiful history of a family that had always been defined by love rather than blood. "There's one more thing," Walter said when we showed him the nearly complete video. He handed me a folder containing legal documents. "I've amended my will and the family trust. From now on, all family members, including those who join by adoption or marriage, are explicitly protected and provided for equally." "Walter, that's incredibly generous, but this isn't about money," I began. He held up a hand to stop me. "This isn't about money for me either. It's about recognition. Diane has wielded influence in this family because she controls the narrative. Now that narrative will change." As the household began to stir, we made our final preparations. Walter arranged for everyone to gather in the main living room after breakfast for an important family announcement. Stephanie positioned the second photographer she had hired to capture reactions. Jack practiced what he would say to support our presentation. Most importantly, we ensured Grace would be late to the gathering, entering only after the most powerful parts of the video had played. I wanted her to witness the family's reaction, not suffer through another potential rejection. "Are you sure this is the right way to handle this?" Jack asked one final time as we prepared to join the family for breakfast. "We could just leave, start fresh, and teach Grace that when people hurt you, you run away?" I shook my head firmly. "No, we teach her that when people try to exclude you, you fight for your rightful place. Not with anger, but with truth and dignity." Jack nodded slowly. "You're right, I'm with you, for Grace." At breakfast, Diane was in fine form, acting as though nothing unpleasant had occurred the previous day. She chatted about plans for the day's activities, carefully avoiding any interaction with Grace, who sat silently pushing food around her plate. "Everyone, please gather in the living room at 10 o'clock, Walter announced as the meal concluded. "I have an important family matter to discuss." Diane looked surprised but quickly recovered. "What a wonderful idea. Perhaps we can review the family portraits from yesterday. The photographer sent me the digital files already." Walter's expression remained impassive. "Perhaps. 10 o'clock sharp, everyone." As family members dispersed after breakfast, I knelt beside Grace. "Sweetheart, Aunt Stephanie wants to show you something special in the garden. Would you like to go with her for a little while?" Grace nodded listlessly, taking Stephanie's outstretched hand. "I'll come get you very soon," I promised. "And things are going to get better. I promise." At precisely 10 o'clock, the entire Davis family assembled in the grand living room. Walter sat prominently at the front, with Jack and I positioned beside him. Diane had attempted to take the seat on Walter's other side, but he had pointedly asked Troy to sit there instead. "Thank you all for coming," Walter began formally. "The Davis family has a long and proud tradition of documenting our history, of remembering who we are and where we came from." His eyes found Diane's. "But history must be accurate to have meaning. Today, we're going to correct some omissions in our family narrative." Diane shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Father, if this is about the portrait arrangement, I simply followed tradition." "This isn't about yesterday's portrait, Diane," Walter interrupted. Though that incident catalyzed what I'm about to share, he nodded to me. Rosemary has prepared a presentation I think will be educational for us all. As the lights dimmed and the video began to play, I took Jack's hand and squeezed it tightly. Whatever happened next would change the Davis family forever. The room fell silent as the video opened with Grace's tearful words to her stuffed rabbit. "They said I'm not real family, Hoppy." Diane immediately stiffened. "This is inappropriate. We don't need to." "Be quiet, Diane," Walter commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. The video continued, cutting between Grace's heartbreak and the family members' own definitions of family. The juxtaposition was powerful adults espousing values of love and acceptance, while a 7-year-old child cried over her exclusion from those very principles. When the historical section began, showing adoptions and blended families throughout Davis history, murmurs of surprise rippled through the room. Many of these stories had never been shared, systematically erased from the family narrative Diane controlled. "That's my grandfather's adopted brother," one cousin whispered. "I never knew he was adopted." "And that's great, Aunt Meredith with her stepchildren," another added. "Mom always said they were her biological kids." Diane's face had gone pale. "These are private family matters that don't need to be aired." "They're our history, Mom," Jack interrupted firmly. "Our real history, the one you've been hiding." When the footage of young Diane with her stepmother appeared, a collective gasp filled the room. The loving relationship was unmistakable. Diane being taught to bake cookies by Eleanor. Diane receiving a birthday gift. Diane crying in Eleanor's arms after what appeared to be a schoolyard disappointment. "Turn this off immediately," Diane demanded, standing abruptly. "No." Walter's voice cut through her protest. "You will watch this, Diane. All of it." The final segment showed a succession of Davis family portraits through the years, each one highlighting members who had joined by marriage, adoption, or other non-biological means. The message was clear. The Davis family had always been more than blood. As the video ended, the room remained utterly silent. Diane sat rigid, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. Walter cleared his throat. "Would anyone like to comment on what we've just seen?" To everyone's surprise, it was Troy who stood first. "I have something to say," he looked directly at his mother. "Mom, what you did to Grace yesterday was cruel and hypocritical, especially given what we've just learned." Amanda shifted uncomfortably beside him. "Troy, maybe this isn't the time to—" "No, it is exactly the time," Troy insisted. "Because there's something else the family doesn't know." He took a deep breath. "Our daughter Lily, your precious granddaughter with the Davis eyes, was conceived through sperm donation. I couldn't father children naturally." Shocked gasps filled the room. Lily, sitting beside her brother, looked up in confusion. "We never told anyone because we feared exactly the kind of exclusion Grace experienced yesterday," Troy continued. "Lily has no biological connection to the Davis family. None. Yet she's been included in every portrait, every celebration, every tradition." Diane stared at her son in disbelief. That's different. You and Amanda are still her parents. Just as Jack and Rosemary are Grace's parents," Troy countered. "There is no difference except your arbitrary rules about who counts as real family." One by one, other family members began to speak up. An aunt revealed her grandfather had been adopted. A cousin acknowledged her mother was actually her stepmother. A teenage nephew admitted he'd been afraid to introduce his adoptive friend to the family because of Diane's attitudes. The dam had broken. Years of conforming to Diane's narrow definition of family had left countless relatives feeling silenced and invalidated. Throughout these revelations, Jack held my hand tightly. "You were right," he whispered. "This needed to happen." The door opened quietly, and Stephanie entered with Grace. Our daughter stood uncertainly in the doorway, watching the emotional scene unfolding before her. Walter noticed her first. "Grace," he called clearly, silencing the room. "Come here, child." Grace approached hesitantly, her eyes darting nervously to Diane. "This young lady," Walter announced, placing his weathered hand on Grace's shoulder, "is my great-granddaughter. Not by blood, but by something far more powerful, by choice and love. From this day forward, Anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me. He turned to Diane, his expression softening slightly. Your stepmother Eleanor loved you as her own. She taught you to bake, helped you with homework, held you when you cried. She was your mother in every way that mattered. How can you deny this child the same recognition? Diane's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down her face as decades of carefully constructed narrative crumbled around her. Eleanor was the only mother I remember, she whispered. When she died, it hurt so much. I thought if I focused on blood connections, on relationships that couldn't be broken by death or divorce. You were trying to protect yourself from loss, Walter finished gently. But in doing so, you've caused others pain, including this innocent child. Grace, witnessing this unfold, slipped her small hand into Diane's. It's okay to be sad, she said, with the simple wisdom of children. When I first came to live with Mom and Dad, I was sad about my first family, too. Diane stared at their joined hands, then at Grace's face. Perhaps for the first time, she truly saw her granddaughter not as an outsider, but as a child offering comfort even after being hurt. I'm sorry, Diane finally said, her voice barely audible. I've been wrong, very wrong. Christopher, Walter called to the photographer who had been quietly documenting the morning's events. I believe it's time for a new family portrait. A complete one. As the family moved outside to the same spot where yesterday's exclusionary photos had been taken, the mood was transformed. Grace was placed in the center of the front row, right beside Lily. Jack stood proudly behind her, his hand on her shoulder, while I stood on her other side. Diane hesitated at the edge of the group until Walter gestured her forward. Your place is with your family, Diane. All of your family. The photos captured that day showed something rare and precious, a family in the process of healing, of expanding its definition of belonging. Grace's smile was tentative but real, a stark contrast to her tears from the previous day. After the portraits were taken, Walter gathered everyone once more. I have one final announcement. I've amended the family trust. From this day forward, all members of this family, regardless of how they joined us, have equal standing and protection. The Davis family legacy will be one of inclusion, not exclusion. The remainder of the reunion passed with a noticeably different atmosphere. Diane remained subdued but made visible efforts to connect with Grace, awkwardly asking about her interests in school. The other children, taking cues from the adults, included Grace in their games. 6 months later, at Christmas, we returned to the Davis estate with some trepidation. Grace was excited but nervous, clutching her new Christmas dress as we approached the house. What if Grandma changed her mind? She whispered to me as we reached the door. Before I could answer, the door swung open to reveal Diane standing there with a photo album in her hands. Grace, she said warmly, kneeling to the child's level. I've been waiting for you. I found some pictures of my stepmother teaching me to bake Christmas cookies. I thought perhaps you and I could try the recipe together? The smile that bloomed on my daughter's face was worth every difficult moment of confrontation. As Grace eagerly followed Diane to the kitchen, Jack squeezed my hand. You were right, he said softly. The truth was more powerful than anger could ever have been. Later that evening, I watched as Grace helped Walter hang a new portrait in the main hallway, the complete family photo from that transformative day 6 months ago. Beside it hung a smaller frame containing the photo of young Diane with Eleanor, restored to its rightful place in family history. You know, Walter said to me, as we watched Grace proudly adjusting the frame, sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children isn't protection from pain, but the tools to transform it. You taught our entire family that lesson. I thought about the journey we'd taken from heartbreak to healing, from exclusion to belonging. The Davis family wasn't perfect, but it was evolving, expanding its definition of love beyond biology to something richer and more meaningful. As I looked around at the gathering, at Jack finally standing firm in his role as Grace's father, at Diane slowly rebuilding bridges she had burned, at Grace finding her place in this complicated family tapestry, I realized that true family isn't defined by blood or documents or even shared history. Family is defined by the courage to fight for one another's belonging, by the willingness to grow beyond comfortable limitations, and by the choice we make every day to love without conditions or qualifications. Grace's journey had transformed not just her place in the family, but the very definition of what the Davis family would be for generations to come. And that, I realized, was the most powerful legacy of all. What would you do if someone excluded your child from family traditions? Have you ever had to stand up against prejudice to protect someone you love? Comment below with your experiences. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of family transformation. And don't forget to share with someone who might need to be reminded that family is about love, not blood. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the courage to stand for those you love.